New reports say Chinese authorities are blurring out the logos of some American brands on TV. That's after the targeted companies commented on forced labor camps in China's Xinjiang region. The U.S. trade blacklist is getting longer. 7 Chinese companies have been added and are now blocked from using American technology. At the same time, the New York Stock Exchange is set to delist a Chinese real estate firm for failing to report its finances. A Chinese airport is secretly collecting foreigners' information on everyone from celebrities to everyday visitors. The data includes their names, photos, and dates of birth. A Chinese truck driver commits suicide after getting a $300 ticket. Now, social media users are outraged over authorities' indifference toward workers' struggles. And the UK is pledging tens of millions of dollars to help people relocate there from Hong Kong. The action offers refuge to those fleeing the city amid Beijing's draconian national security law. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Chinese authorities are blurring out logos of some American businesses on TV. This is because they mentioned forced labor camps in China's Xinjiang region. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Chinese media is blurring out Western brand logos on TV in retaliation for Xinjiang cotton comments. The BBC reports it's delayed some broadcasts because post-production editors have so much to censor, from shoes to T-shirts. It seems to be Beijing's latest retaliation against Western brands for expressing concerns about forced labor, in particular in the cotton industry of China's Xinjiang region. Targeted brands are among members of the Better Cotton Initiative, a non-profit group promoting sustainable cotton production. This includes Nike, Adidas and Puma. Beijing denies the claim of forced labor and has even launched a campaign to promote Xinjiang cotton within China. This has seen shares of Chinese clothing brands jump in recent weeks. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
The U.S. Commerce Department has added 7 more Chinese entities to its blacklist, citing national security reasons. These entities have supercomputing capabilities, meaning much higher level of performance than your regular computers. The Commerce Department says they are involved with building supercomputers for the Chinese military, including for weapons of mass destruction programs. Being on the blacklist means if these companies want to buy from U.S. suppliers, they have to apply for a license from the Commerce Department. The new rules take effect immediately. Former President Donald Trump added dozens of Chinese companies to its economic blacklist, including telecom giant Huawei and top chipmaker SMIC. A Chinese company is to be delisted from the New York Stock Exchange. A Tuesday statement revealed the exchange is set to delist Chinese property company Danke for failing to report financial results. The online real estate company is formerly known as Phoenix Tree Holdings. It follows a similar business model to U.S.-based company WeWork, but deals with residential areas instead of cities. The company has withheld financial reports since the first quarter of 2020. That's amid the stock exchange's requests for the information. The secrecy comes amid major financial losses over the last few years. From 2017 to October of 2020, the company lost a total of around $1 billion. The company was founded in 2015 and has traded on the New York Stock Exchange since January of 2020. Back then, it raised $130 million in its initial public offering. But company stock has lost 75% of its value in the past 12 months. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission started taking action to address issues with foreign companies in March. The move targets foreign firms refusing to allow the U.S. to review their audit books. Companies who don't comply will be delisted from American stock markets. Beijing does not allow other countries to review audit books from Chinese companies, citing national security concerns. More than 200 Chinese companies are listed on American stock exchanges. Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo hosted a discussion with Silicon Valley businessman Peter Thiel. The discussion centered around China, big tech, and the threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party. Tuesday night, former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo sat down at the Nixon seminar with PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel. The two discussed how the communist regime uses big tech to undermine America. Thiel also sits on the board at Facebook. He suggested that many U.S.-based tech companies and universities have played a role in China's military rise. A specific case he mentioned was when Google refused to work with the U.S. military on artificial intelligence technology, Yet, they were willing to work with Chinese civilian companies. Thiel said that in a communist country, civilian and military are often fused together. He also highlighted the disproportionate ratio of Chinese students studying in the U.S. compared to Americans studying in China, as well as how many American universities have turned a blind eye to Chinese espionage. He suggested that the flow of Chinese money coming into American universities should be investigated. Thiel asked Pompeo if he thinks the U.S. has a good understanding of the power struggle in China. China experts say that Communist Party leader Xi Jinping's political hold on the country is more fragile than what the regime projects. Pompeo replied cautiously. He cited the fall of the Berlin Wall and how no one saw the collapse of the Soviet Union coming until the moment it happened. Pompeo emphasized that in this situation, it's not a country threatening us. He says it's the Communist Party issuing the threats. He added that we should be unashamed to talk about that fact. A Chinese airport is secretly collecting foreigners' private information. It includes their name, photo, and date of birth. This information could potentially be accessed by China's high-level authorities. NTD's Don Ma has more.
For those flying to China, Beijing has been secretly collecting foreigners' personal information at a Shanghai airport. Dating back to 2017, collected information includes names, photos, birth dates, and passport numbers. Children aren't even exempted. A 9-year-old's personal information was also collected. The database was discovered by Australian cybersecurity firm Internet 2.0. Its chief executive told the Australian Broadcasting Corporation that the database appears to feed into China's larger mass surveillance system. The database has records on over 5,000 foreigners. They were reportedly collected when they passed through Shanghai's Pudong International Airport. Among those that were tracked, there were around 700 Americans, 160 Australians, and around 100 British citizens. The information is stored on servers under the jurisdiction of China's main law enforcement authorities. Some of the people targeted are simply visitors, but some are professors, researchers, government workers, and major company executives, such as those from Apple, Microsoft, Pfizer, and even the U.S. State Department. Grammy-winning R&B singer Ashanti Sequoia Douglas was also found on the database. It's unknown if people were targeted randomly, but a senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute points out that it shouldn't be a surprise to any foreigner visiting China that they might be tracked. Don Ma, NTD News.
Scientists around the world are calling for a new investigation into the origins of the pandemic. Citing procedural failures, they say the investigation done by the World Health Organization is not credible. The call came on Wednesday as an open letter. It was drafted by a former U.S. State Department senior advisor and is now signed by 24 scientists from 11 countries. The letter also points to a potential conflict of interest. It says the WHO's investigation report was written as a joint effort with the Chinese Communist Party and that the findings were polluted by politics. The WHO report rejected the theory that the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP virus, came from a Chinese lab, calling the theory extremely unlikely. It added that no further investigation should be done on the topic. Despite the report's firm stance, the open letter says no solid proof was given as to why the theory can be ruled out. The report dismissed the theory in just a couple hundred words. Less than 1% of the entire report was spent covering it. On Thursday, China's foreign ministry criticized the open letter. It accused the U.S. and other countries of attacking China. This despite the letter saying calling for a full investigation into the origins of the pandemic is not intended to point fingers at any one country. Coming up, a truck driver from northern China killed himself after getting a $300 ticket. But what's to blame? Netizens are outraged over the quality of China's satellite navigation system, on top of officials' indifference toward truck driver struggles. More on that after the break. A $300 fine marked the final straw for a truck driver in northern China. The man committed suicide earlier this week. Driver Jing drove through a trucker's checkpoint during his route on Monday. Their inspector said his Beidou navigation system, or BDS, got disconnected. The satellite GPS system is mandatory for all truck drivers in the country, so they detained his truck and gave him a $300 ticket. Jing tried to explain the disconnect wasn't his fault, but authorities paid little mind. Having reached the end of his rope, Jing purchased a highly toxic pesticide from a nearby store and ended his life. He left a suicide note explaining what pushed him over the edge. Jing wrote that he was 51. He has been a hard-working truck driver for 10 years, but earned little. He also often got sick and had health problems, but still had to keep working. He reiterated that it's not the driver's fault when the BDS disconnects, and noted that the quality of the system has proved a nightmare for truck drivers. He wrote, "It's not that my life isn't worth $300. I do this to speak out for the majority of truck drivers. I hope my death will spark leaders' attention on this matter." He drank the pesticide while inside a corridor near the inspector's office area, but he wasn't sent to the hospital until the last moment of his life. His brother later learned that Jing had posted a video on a truck driver chatting group. In the clip, Jing said it had been 10 minutes since he drank the pesticide, but that no one took notice. His brother also discovered later that there's only $900 in Jing's bank account. Information surrounding Jing's death has caught the public eye online. Under pressure from public opinion, officials confirmed that it did happen, claiming that related departments are investigating and will update. Many netizens are voicing outrage that officials hand out tickets and fines for minor offenses. One user posted, "The regime has to keep a bunch of thugs in order to expand its power. Its financial resources are sustained by these fines." The BDS navigation system was developed in China, designed as global competition to American-made GPS systems. It's widely believed that the Chinese Communist Party aims to use it to reduce its dependence on GPS, especially for its military. On the roads, any driver who fails to install the system won't be granted a trucking operating license. Drivers also have to pay heavy installation fees and annual maintenance fees in order to access it. If a trucker is found to have disconnected from the system, they can face fines of up to nearly $800. Another online user commented on the related technical problems, saying if the BDS system got disconnected, it's the BDS that needs to compensate the drivers, not the opposite. These drivers are really hardworking. This world is no longer for humans. It's the devil's world. An article posted online notes that instead of saying safe trip or drive safe, Chinese truck drivers often remind each other to check their BDS connections before departing. The CCP is re-releasing about 8 propaganda movies to celebrate its anniversary this year, but Chinese moviegoers don't seem to be very excited about them. According to China's box office ranking, those propaganda movies, or red movies, are one of the worst in terms of ticket sales. 2 of them appeared at the bottom of a list of almost 200 films screened this year. The rest don't even show up because not enough people have watched them. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the CCP's founding. The regime is reportedly mandating public screenings of red movies. Each theater in China has to play at least 2 red movies per week. Theater owners can choose from 12 of them. Most of the movies were filmed decades ago. One of the 12 red films portrays Chinese communist soldiers fighting against the U.S. in the Korean War. What it doesn't say is that the communist side lost over 2 million soldiers during the Korean War. The film also claims the U.S. supported the so-called South Korean invasion of communist North Korea. But historians widely believe it was the Soviet Union-backed North Korea that invaded South Korea. In the meantime, Chinese authorities delayed the re-release of the Lord of the Rings series. Instead, many theaters will show red movies. One Chinese netizen wrote, "Garbage is just garbage. It'll never turn into gold." Many Chinese fans of the Lord of the Rings series are disappointed that they have to wait longer now. On the other hand, a new Hollywood film, Godzilla vs. Kong, became a blockbuster in China. Its ticket revenue has reached the equivalent of over $150 million as of Wednesday. It's now one of the top 5 this year. The Chinese regime is now reviewing all Japanese animes before they are allowed to be shown in China. In response, some Chinese fans are switching to Taiwanese platforms. Earlier this month, the CCP required all video sharing platforms to submit Japanese animes to the regime's National Radio and Television Administration for review. The animes have to be approved and get registered before broadcast. This policy reportedly prevented China's biggest video sharing platform, Bilibili, from releasing many Japanese animes. This despite the platform having purchased their exclusive broadcasting rights in China. According to online sources, many Japanese animes on Bilibili are now labeled as available only in Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan. Chinese netizens can only watch them through special apps that overcome China's internet censorship. Many Bilibili users and other Chinese netizens are extremely dissatisfied with the move. Some are asking, is it true that animes have to go through an authorization process before broadcast? Some are expressing their suspicion, saying, I doubt the new animes will get approved. Some are saying this takes us back to 20 years ago. Many anime fans in China are now turning to a Taiwanese anime viewing platform. Some of them are leaving comments praising Taiwan, some even claiming that they want to become Taiwanese. Hong Kong democracy activist Nathan Law announces that Britain has granted him political asylum. He arrived in Britain last July after Beijing imposed its draconian national security law on his home city. In a tweet, Law described being interviewed several times over 4 months by the British government before his application for asylum was approved. The move is certain to ratchet up tensions between London and Beijing. Britain estimates that over 300,000 Hong Kong residents could emigrate over the next 5 years. And Bank of America expects Hong Kong residents moving to Britain could trigger capital outflows of $36 billion in 2021. The UK is pledging tens of millions of dollars to help people relocating there from Hong Kong. This comes after Beijing imposed draconian security laws in the city.
Britain has pledged support for people from Hong Kong looking to resettle in the UK to the tune of $59 million. As part of a wider effort to let millions of Hong Kongers into Britain after China imposed new security laws in its former colony. The UK said Thursday the money will mostly go to programs for English language support and housing, and efforts to help those from Hong Kong find jobs. Since January, thousands of Hong Kong residents have been able to apply for special 5-year visas and eventually become UK citizens. With the new offer, Britain plans to launch a dozen welcome hubs around the UK to help with registering for healthcare, schools, and provide advice for setting up businesses there. Britain says it is fulfilling a historic and moral commitment to the people of Hong Kong, and that China's security laws are being used to silence dissent. Ministers say the visa program is a way of honoring their side of the deal to hand Hong Kong back to Beijing in 1997. China has reacted angrily to the UK's efforts and have said that the West's views are clouded by misinformation and imperialism. So far, 27,000 people applied for the visa scheme through March, and the UK expects 300,000 people to apply over the next 5 years.
You might have heard about the Chinese regime's Belt and Road Initiative. The U.S. considers it a threat and a plan for global expansion. The CCP claims that it's a revival of ancient China's Silk Road. Now we look deeper into the relations between the two. The ancient trade corridors brought commercial and cultural exchanges between China and countries across the globe. But does Xi Jinping's new program really inherit ancient wisdoms? Or does it appropriate an ancient strategy to promote its own communist expansion and export an ideology that's completely different from traditional Chinese values? First, we look at how ancient Chinese looked at their relations with foreign countries. In imperial China, Confucianism and Taoism were the two mainstream ideologies. So how did Lao Tzu and Confucius look at foreign relations and outward expansion? In Taoist classic Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu stressed the importance of being humble and inclusive. What makes a great state is its being like a low-lying, down-flowing stream. It becomes the center that all the small states under heaven tend to. The great state only wishes to unite men together and nourish them. A small state only wishes to be received by and to serve the other. Each gets what it desires, but the great state must learn to humble itself. He said because a great nation or a wise man does not strive and fight, no one finds it possible to strive or fight with him. The Chinese character for military or martial arts Wu is composed of two parts, to stop and invaders' lances. The historical record book of Han says Cang Jie, the inventor of Chinese characters, created the character Wu with stop and weapon. The wise man uses the military to stop violence, chaos, and fighting. It was not meant for people to be indulged in brutal activities. In ancient China, the very first lesson martial arts students learned was that the goal of martial arts is to stop violence. Contrary to the Darwinian idea of survival of the fittest, and the CCP's idea that if you fall behind, you are bound to be bullied. Mencius doesn't believe in might is right. He said, when there is no righteousness under heaven, less powerful nations become submissive to more powerful ones, and the weak to the strong. But when there is righteousness under heaven, nations of little virtue are submissive to those of great virtue. Mencius also said the kingdom is overawed, not by the sharpness and strength of arms. He who finds the righteous course will have many to assist him. He who loses the proper course has few to assist him. He believed that if a state were to attack or conquer another, it must be on the side of the Tao, or righteousness. Throughout Chinese history, emperors implemented these ideas to create a more secure and prosperous society. A Ming Dynasty emperor, for example, sent out the famous Chinese Muslim maritime explorer Zheng He to spread the principles of virtue to touch and reform people from afar. The voyages opened China's so-called maritime Silk Road. It aimed to rekindle trade with other maritime nations and smooth the flow of vital goods, including medicine, tin, and horses. Zhen's vessels set off from eastern China, carrying goods such as rice, tea, and bronze. He brought with him some 600 officials, including doctors, astrologers, and cartographers. During his 7 voyages, Zhen led his well-equipped fleets to sail across the Pacific, Indian, and Atlantic Oceans. He was able to reach more than 30 nations and regions, voyaging to as far as the Cape of Good Hope. He traded with the locals and also introduced them to Confucianism and Chinese calligraphy. The size and strength of his dozen of fleets easily made the Ming Emperor the strongest naval power at the time. The largest ships had a displacement of 20 to 30,000 tons. That's roughly 1/3 to a half of the displacement of modern U.S. aircraft carriers. They also exceeded that of modern Chinese carriers. The voyages were not completely void of violence, but Zhen's targets were oftentimes pirates. In one case, Zhen also got involved with an Indonesian king's stepson who tried to kill the king. Zhen fought against the rebellious prince. Nonetheless, he did not turn any of the regions he explored into Chinese colonies. The kingdoms were still ruled independently after Zhen had left. A current-day CCP advisor once lamented that Zhen and the Ming Emperor did not use their power to occupy and claim the Indian Ocean. That's something the Communist Party's military is likely aiming for now. And back in the day, Zhen could have achieved it, but he didn't do it. This might be a major difference between ancient China and modern-day communist China. The question is not whether China is powerful or not. It's whether it uses its power to do good or evil. The Belt and Road Initiative oftentimes involves building local Confucius institutes. While Confucius is known for promoting benevolent governments, the CCP exports its communist ideology and censorship to foreign campuses in the name of Confucius. The party uses such institute as a leverage to stop criticism of the regime's human rights abuses. Former Chinese official turned activist Bao Tong once said, "Confucius is my teacher, but I agree people should shut down Confucius institutes. I think that Confucius institutes all over the world are slaughterhouses ruining this philosopher and his doctrine. These institutes have nothing to do with Confucius. They all have the same surname, communism." Now, as the regime promotes its Belt and Road Initiative in the name of Zhen He and the Silk Road, people may want to take a moment to think whether the regime is exporting traditional values of benevolent governments, or is it exporting censorship, corruption, and communism? And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, a quick announcement. My colleague Evelyn Lee will stand in tomorrow as I have some personal business to attend to. But I will be back next week. Thanks for watching and see you soon.